Water warfare scenario, strategic vulnerability of desalination states. Disclaimer. This document is a hypothetical scenario analysis prepared for the purpose of security studies and critical infrastructure protection. The content presented here does not advocate, encourage, or support real-world attacks or military operations. Instead, it is intended to explore potential vulnerabilities in modern infrastructure systems in order to better understand risks, improve resilience, and support discussions about conflict prevention and international cooperation. All references to countries, facilities, and military systems are based in publicly available information and are used solely as analytical examples. This work should be understood as a strategic foresight exercise examining how infrastructure dependencies may shape future security challenges. Shadow of Thirst, Infrastructure Warfare Scenario Analysis. Chapter 1, Vulnerability Analysis. Israel possesses some of the world's most advanced seawater desalination technologies and relies on 5 major desalination plants: Palmachim, Sorek, Hadera, Ashdod, and Ashkelon for roughly 80% of its drinking water supply. These facilities are strategically located along the Mediterranean coast, but their proximity to military bases and other critical infrastructure creates a structural vulnerability. Palmachim area. The Palmachim Air Base, which supports UAV operations and missile testing, lies within several hundred meters to roughly 1 to -2 kilometers off nearby infrastructure. The Sorek desalination plant is also located in the Nahal Sorek River area, within several kilometers of the Sorek Nuclear Research Center. The defensive logic behind placing military facilities near sensitive installations intended to protect nuclear assets creates a paradox. The proximity of bases and critical civilian infrastructure may provide adversaries with a justification to claim that attacks are directed at military targets while still causing damage to water infrastructure. Hadera. The Hadera desalination plant sits adjacent to the Orat Rabin power station, Israel's largest power plant. The two facilities share cooling water infrastructure, meaning that damage to the power plant could simultaneously disrupt electricity and water production. Other facilities. The Ashdod plant lies close to port facilities with military significance. Overall, Israel's limited coastal geography encourages infrastructure concentration, increasing the strategic value of these locations as targets for saturation attacks. Cluster munition threat. Cluster warheads pose a particularly serious concern. Reverse osmosis, RO, membrane systems are housed within protected buildings and are highly redundant. Therefore, destroying the entire plant with a small number of submunitions would be unrealistic. However, attacks against electrical systems, intake pumps, and power supply infrastructure could plausibly halt operations entirely. If intercepted missiles disperse submunitions during mid-air interception, unexploded ordnance may remain on the ground, effectively turning infrastructure zones into temporary minefields and significantly delaying repair operations. Asymmetric resilience. Iran's water system presents a contrasting structure. Its water supply relies primarily on groundwater and dam systems with far less dependence on desalination. Although Iran faces a severe water crisis including 6 consecutive years of drought, land subsidence, and water rationing, groundwater resources function as a buffer that cannot be destroyed by conventional weapons. This creates an asymmetric situation. While vulnerable to long-term environmental degradation, Iran's water infrastructure is less susceptible to immediate collapse from a single strike. Chapter 2, Attack Scenario. In this scenario, Iran launches a saturation strike using Khorram's Har-4 ballistic missiles modified to carry cluster-type warheads. The primary targets are military facilities, while desalination plants suffer collateral disruption. Target selection. The attack focuses on Palmachim Air Base and the Hadera power station. Several hundred missiles are launched in waves in an attempt to overwhelm Israel's air defense systems. Each warhead disperses dozens to hundreds of submunitions across a wide area, approximately a 5 to -8 kilometers radius. Instead of attempting to destroy RO membrane systems directly, the attack prioritizes electrical grid connections, pumping stations, water intake infrastructure. Although the membrane systems themselves remain physically intact, loss of power halts desalination operations. Timing. The strike occurs before Israel can fully deploy emerging countermeasures such as distributed micro-desalination plants, the iron beam laser defense system. Because Iran is not a signatory to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, the attack does not technically violate that treaty, potentially limiting international legal consequences while still generating diplomatic condemnation. Information warfare. Following the attack, coordinated messaging spreads across social media platforms. Military bases were the intended targets. Israel's own interception systems scattered submunitions and caused the shutdown of water facilities. Such narratives attempt to shift blame onto defensive actions while fueling domestic unrest. Immediate consequences. The attack results in the loss of more than 70% of Israel's drinking water production capacity. Water rationing begins in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. News broadcasts repeatedly show images of discolored water flowing from taps, amplifying public panic. Supermarkets experience shortages of bottled water, and civil unrest emerges in several urban areas as basic survival concerns spread through the population. Chapter 3: The Defense Dilemma. Israel's air defense network, including David's sling and arrow systems, intercepts ballistic missiles at mid-altitude. However, this creates an unintended consequence. The interception paradox. Destroying incoming missiles can cause cluster warheads to disperse their submunitions in the air. Modern cluster munitions may have failure rates of roughly 5–20%, leaving unexploded ordnance scattered across infrastructure zones and access roads. As a result, repair crews cannot safely enter damaged desalination plants, delaying restoration efforts by months. The alternative option. Allowing missiles to strike directly would cause immediate damage but would avoid unexploded ordnance contamination, potentially enabling faster recovery. However, governments cannot realistically adopt a strategy that deliberately allows incoming missiles to land without interception. Protecting civilian lives remains the overriding priority. The nuclear proximity paradox. The proximity of military bases protecting facilities such as the Sorek Nuclear Research Center inadvertently increases the strategic value of nearby infrastructure as targets. Efforts to defend nuclear installations may therefore expose civilian infrastructure to greater risk, creating a classic security paradox. Strategic strain. Saturation attacks rapidly deplete interceptor stockpiles. Defenders face a difficult trade-off between protecting point targets, military bases, and area targets, civilian infrastructure such as desalination plants. Water shortages quickly translate into social instability, increasing political pressure on national leadership. Chapter 4: Proposed Countermeasures. Following such an attack, Israel would likely pursue multiple defensive reforms. Infrastructure distribution. Dependence on large centralized desalination plants could be reduced through distributed desalination systems. Container-sized modular desalination units could be deployed across the coastline and linked through AI-managed networks. Even if several units were destroyed, the system could continue operating as a resilient distributed network. In parallel, groundwater extraction and wastewater recycling rates could be expanded to over 90% reuse capacity. Air defense innovation. The deployment of the Iron Beam high-energy laser system could provide a cost-effective defense against saturation attacks. Laser interception could destroy missiles before cluster warheads deploy or potentially neutralize submunitions after dispersion. Unlike missile interceptors, laser systems are not constrained by finite ammunition supplies. Infrastructure separation. Future planning may prioritize greater geographic separation between military bases, nuclear facilities, civilian infrastructure. Reducing spatial overlap lowers the risk of collateral disruption. Strategic deterrence. Preventive strikes against missile launch facilities and stronger international diplomatic efforts to restrict cluster munitions may also become part of broader deterrence strategies. Information defense. Governments would need stronger capabilities to counter coordinated disinformation campaigns designed to exploit infrastructure crises and amplify domestic unrest. Chapter 5: Global Implications. If such a strategy proved effective, it could influence conflict planning in other regions. Taiwan Strait. China may study vulnerabilities in Taiwan's infrastructure, particularly where desalination facilities are located near military installations such as those around Taishung Port. Targeting water infrastructure could serve as a form of pre-invasion shock operation, potentially delaying external intervention. Korean Peninsula. North Korea could apply similar concepts against South Korea's densely concentrated infrastructure and nearby U.S. military installations such as Camp Humphreys. Combined attacks involving cluster munitions and electronic warfare could disrupt electricity and communications networks. Unexploded ordnance contamination might further delay recovery operations. Conclusion. A hypothetical water infrastructure conflict in the Middle East would highlight a broader global vulnerability. Modern urban societies increasingly rely on highly concentrated critical infrastructure systems, particularly in coastal megacities dependent on desalination. The defensive logic of protecting strategic assets such as nuclear facilities or military bases may unintentionally create new vulnerabilities for civilian systems. Understanding these structural risks is essential for improving infrastructure resilience and preventing future conflicts in which water itself becomes a strategic weapon.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a chilling blueprint for modern warfare. It's a strategy that doesn't just target soldiers or tanks, but a nation's most vital resource, its water, to bring it to its knees. I want you to just imagine this for a second. 80% of your country's entire supply of fresh, clean drinking water comes from just 5 massive facilities, all located right on the coast.
You know, this isn't just some hypothetical question. It's actually a very detailed strategic scenario that lays out exactly how to cripple a modern nation without even needing a full-scale invasion. Okay, let's dive right into this.
Our story starts with a core vulnerability, and we're focusing on a nation that's, famous for its tech and its strength, Israel. And we're going to look at what's called its water paradox. So here's the paradox. Israel has pretty much mastered the science of desalination, turning salt water into fresh water. It's an incredible, life-saving achievement. But, and this is a big but, by doing that, they've also created a system that is super centralized, which makes it incredibly fragile. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the geography here. These 5 plants, which are basically the nation's lifeline, they aren't just randomly placed on the coast. No, they were deliberately built right next to other really important targets. Things like air bases, nuclear research centers, and major power plants. This co-location, well, that's the key to the whole thing.
And this setup? Well, it creates what military folks call an asymmetric vulnerability. It means one side's advanced, concentrated, and frankly, brittle infrastructure is way easier to break than an enemy's system that's all spread out, low-tech, and resilient. I mean, you can't exactly take out hundreds of scattered groundwater wells with a single missile, right?
So, the big question. How could an adversary actually exploit this weakness? Well, the analysis lays out a very specific step-by-step scenario for total infrastructure collapse. And the attack scenario doesn't even rely on some massive bunker-busting bomb. Nope, the weapon of choice is a long-range ballistic missile, but it's tipped with what's called a cluster warhead. You should think of it less like a single, powerful bullet and more like a giant shotgun shell that just blankets a huge area with hundreds of little explosives. And this is the truly brilliant and terrifying part of the strategy. The official targets are totally legitimate military sites like the Palmachim Air Base. But just as the missiles get close, they open up and release all those little submunitions over a really wide area. The real damage, the collateral effect, is that those small explosives cut the power lines and destroy the exposed water pumps for the desalination plant that's right next door. So the main building might be fine, but with no power and no water coming in, it's completely useless. And then, immediately after the physical attack, the information war begins. The story pushed out on social media is all about plausible deniability. The message is simple. We didn't do this, your own government did. It's designed to make people angry at their own leaders. And the result of all this? It's catastrophic. We're talking about over 70% of the entire country's fresh water supply getting cut off almost instantly. Within days, the taps in major cities like Tel Aviv just run dry. You can imagine the panic. Okay, this is where the strategy gets truly diabolical, because it creates this terrifying dilemma for the nation that's under attack. It's a situation where doing the right thing, the logical thing, actually leads to the worst possible outcome.
So you're probably asking the obvious question, right? With all this advanced air defense, why not just shoot the incoming missiles down? Seems simple enough. But the way this particular weapon is designed, it creates a devastating and totally counterintuitive trap. And here is that trap. If you intercept the missile, great. You protect the facility from a direct hit. But blowing it up in the air scatters all those unexploded submunitions everywhere. It literally creates a minefield, which means you can't send in repair crews for weeks, maybe months. Paradoxically, it might actually be better to let the missile hit, because while the damage would be severe, at least you could start repairs right away. It's a true no-win scenario.
The military has a duty to protect its people, so of course they're going to intercept the missile. But that very act of defense guarantees the attacker's ultimate goal, a long-term, society-breaking water crisis. You lose if you win. So, what on earth can be done to counter this kind of threat? And maybe more importantly, why does this one specific scenario have massive implications for the entire world? Well, the analysis doesn't just point out the problem, it also proposes solutions. The main idea is to basically reverse the centralization. Instead of a few giant targets, you build hundreds of smaller networked units. You stop building critical civilian infrastructure right next to military bases. And you get creative with defense, using things like lasers to zap those tiny submunitions right out of the sky. But here's the really scary takeaway from all this. This strategy, this playbook for causing societal collapse by paralyzing infrastructure, it isn't just about the Middle East. The logic here can be applied almost anywhere.
Analysts are now looking at how this same template could be used in other hotspots. For example, a strike on Taiwanese military ports could accidentally knock out the desalination plants right next door. A limited strike on U.S. bases in South Korea could paralyze the power and water grids for the megacity of Seoul. The principle is exactly the same. Use the closeness of military and civilian targets against them.
What we're really talking about here is a fundamental shift in what war even is. They're calling it infrastructure warfare. The goal isn't just to defeat an army on a battlefield anymore. The goal is to cause a cascading failure of the systems, water, power, communications, that make modern life possible. And in doing so, turn the people against their own leaders. And that leaves us with a really unsettling question for the 21st century. When the power plant, the water pump, the fiber optic cable, when those become the primary targets, the front line is suddenly everywhere. It's in our cities, it's in our homes, and it's connected to the very tap we drink from.
Imagine turning on your kitchen tap, expecting clear drinking water.
Right, just a normal day.
Yeah, but instead you see this brown, muddy sludge just dripping out.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It is, and not because of a natural drought or a burst pipe down the street.
No, something much bigger.
Exactly, because your city's entire water supply has just become collateral damage in a high-tech geopolitical war.
It's a scenario that feels like science fiction, but it's really not.
Not at all, and that's exactly what we are unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into a really gripping scenario analysis. It's titled Shadow of Thirst, Scenario Analysis of Infrastructure War.
It is an incredibly detailed document.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore how something as fundamental as drinking water, I mean, we all need it, has secretly become one of the most glaring vulnerabilities in modern warfare.
Yeah, it's the Achilles heel of modern nations, honestly.
Right. But before we dive too deep into this, I need to make something very clear to you, our listener.
Yeah, this is important context.
It is. This deep dive covers some highly politically charged military scenarios. We're talking about hypotheticals involving Israel, Iran, China, Taiwan, and the Koreas.
Very sensitive topics.
Very. So I want to state clearly that we are not endorsing the viewpoints, the military strategies, or the geopolitical stances of this content.
Right. We're just the messengers here.
Exactly. We are simply trying to convey the fascinating and frankly terrifying ideas contained in the original source material and do it as impartially as possible.
What's fascinating here is that when we normally think of warfare, we picture attacks strictly on military bases, right, or airfields.
Yeah, naval ports, tanks in a field, that kind of thing.
Exactly. We tend to treat civilian infrastructure and military targets as these two completely separate worlds.
Like they exist in different realities.
Right. But this analysis just completely shatters that illusion. It reveals how deeply and intimately our civilian water supply is entangled with the exact targets an adversary actually wants to hit.
Okay, let's unpack this by looking at Israel, which serves as the primary case study in the source document.
And it's a perfect case study for this.
It really is, because Israel has pulled off what is frankly an incredible technological miracle.
Oh, absolutely. Their water management is world-renowned.
Yeah, they managed to get about 80% of their drinking water from just 5 massive seawater desalination plants.
Which is a staggering volume of water.
It is. We are talking about the Palmachim, Sorek, Hadera, Ashdod, and Ashkelon facilities, and they're all just spread out along the Mediterranean coast.
Right, and on a spreadsheet, that looks brilliant.
Yeah, centralizing water production into 5 megaplants sounds incredibly efficient.
It is a marvel of engineering, but that extreme centralization creates a fatal geographic flaw.
Because of where they put them.
Exactly. These massive vital water plants are physically placed mere footsteps away from high-value military and critical infrastructure.
It's almost hard to believe until you look at the map.
Right. The Palmachim area plant, for instance, sits anywhere from a few hundred meters to maybe a couple of kilometers from a major airbase.
And that base is heavily utilized for UAV and missile testing, right?
Precisely. And the Sorek plant is in that exact same general vicinity within a few kilometers of the Sorek Nuclear Research Center.
Which is a massive target.
Yeah.
And the integration goes even deeper than just sharing a zip code.
Oh, yeah. They are physically woven together.
Take the Hadera desalination plant. It is built flush against Israel's largest power plant, Orat Rabin.
They literally share a cooling water system.
Right, making them virtually a single operational organism. You hit one, you hit the other.
And Ashdod is situated directly adjacent to a major naval port.
So you essentially have a nation's drinking water physically hugging its most sensitive military and energy targets.
It's a very precarious situation.
It feels like taping your house key to a stick of dynamite to keep it safe from burglars. I mean, the very thing keeping it secure is what guarantees it gets blown up.
That is a great analogy, and it perfectly describes the nuclear paradox that's outlined in the analysis.
The nuclear paradox, right?
The historical logic was rooted in protection. The idea was to place the most critical civilian asset under the impenetrable umbrella of your most heavily defended military assets.
Makes sense on paper. You want your water guarded by the best weapons.
Exactly. But the analysis points out that this nuclear defense proximity actually gives an adversary the ultimate excuse to strike the area.
Because they can just say they were aiming at the military.
Right. An attacker can launch a massive barrage at the military base, drag the civilian water supply right into the crosshairs, and later claim they were only aiming at a legitimate military target.
So the design meant to avoid a threat is essentially issuing an invitation for one.
It gives them the perfect geopolitical cover story.
And the analysis heavily contrasts this hyper-centralized, high-tech setup with Iran's current water infrastructure, which highlights a pretty wild asymmetry.
Yeah, the comparison is really striking.
Because Iran is dealing with a severe 6-year continuous drought. I mean, they are facing massive land subsidence and strict water rationing.
It is a dire, ongoing crisis for them day to day.
It really is. But their system relies almost entirely on dispersed groundwater extraction and traditional dams.
Right, rather than these highly centralized, high-tech coastal desalination plants.
And strategically, that crisis actually provides Iran with a massive defensive buffer in this specific hypothetical scenario.
It does, because you cannot blow up an underground aquifer with a ballistic missile.
Right. Even though Iran's water situation is incredibly strained, it's practically immune to a sudden single-strike collapse.
You can't just evaporate 80% of their drinking water in a single afternoon the way you could with centralized plants.
It highlights a fundamental non-symmetry in infrastructure warfare. One side operates a brittle, high-tech glass tower.
And the other operates a sprawling, albeit depleted, sponge.
So knowing this massive geographic vulnerability exists, how would an adversary actually exploit it?
Well, the authors game this out with a terrifyingly specific scenario in Chapter 2.
Yeah, the hypothetical saturation attack launched by Iran. And the weapon of choice here is really specific, the Khorramshahr-4 ballistic missile.
Which is a crucial detail.
Why that specific missile?
Because the Khorramshahr-4 has a range of about 2,000 kilometers.
Wow, 2,000.
Yeah. That means these weapons can be launched from deep within Iranian territory, hit anywhere in Israel, and arrive with effectively zero warning time.
But the real nightmare outlined in the document isn't just the speed of the missile, right? It's the payload.
Exactly. They aren't using traditional bunker buster bombs designed to crack open concrete.
They are using cluster warheads, which completely changes the math for the defenders.
The tactical shift is profound. The attackers know that trying to directly destroy the massive, super tough reverse osmosis membranes is nearly impossible.
Those are the actual filters that clean the water, right?
Right. And those membranes are housed safely inside heavily reinforced hardened structures. You'd need a direct massive hit to destroy them.
So instead of trying to crack the shell, the cluster warheads are designed to sever the facility's life support.
Exactly.
It's like instead of using a sniper rifle trying to pierce a reinforced bunker, this is a massive shotgun blast aimed at the fragile, exposed veins surrounding it.
That's exactly how it works. These missiles open up midair and scatter dozens to hundreds of submunitions over a massive 5 to 8 kilometer radius.
And they are specifically calibrated to shred the local power grids, the transformers, and those massive intake pumps bringing the raw seawater in.
Because desalination requires immense uninterrupted electrical power to force water through those membranes.
So without power and without water intake, those tough membranes sitting safely in their bunkers are completely useless.
The water supply stops instantly.
And the timing of this hypothetical attack relies on a specific window of opportunity, plus a pretty glaring legal loophole.
Right, because Iran is not a signatory to the international treaty banning cluster munitions.
So from their legal perspective, utilizing them wouldn't technically be a treaty violation.
Exactly. Furthermore, the scenario assumes a strike executed before next-generation laser defense systems are fully deployed and operational across the region.
They hit before the shield is fully up, but the physical devastation is only half of the strategy outlined here. The psychological warfare that immediately follows is just as destructive.
Oh, the information war aspect is chilling.
The analysis details how, as the missiles fall, a massive social media campaign launches, and it explicitly claims, "We only targeted military bases and nuclear facilities."
It was your own interceptor missiles that shot down our weapons, scattered the cluster bombs, and destroyed the water plants.
Your own government's incompetence stopped your water.
It is a brilliantly insidious piece of propaganda. It uses the chaos of the defense to turn the civilian population against their own government.
The goal isn't just to break the pipes. The goal is to break the society.
And the physical fallout described in the analysis is catastrophic. 70% of the drinking water grid fails immediately.
Even factoring in emergency water reserves and extreme rationing, the text says panic sets in within days.
The picture painted is grim. Tel Aviv erupts in riots.
Desperate citizens are literally fighting in the streets for bottled water. And driving all of this is the media.
Right, television news stations looping footage of that brown, muddy sludge dripping from taps.
Triggering an absolute survival instinct panic across the entire population. I mean, you can survive a while without electricity, but water panic is immediate and primal.
It bypasses all rationality.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The analysis describes a mind-bending dilemma facing Israel's advanced air defense systems, like David's Sling and the Arrow system.
The Defender's Paradox.
Right. You would naturally assume that having a top-tier missile defense shield is an absolute, unequivocal win.
You'd want to shoot down every incoming threat.
But the mechanics of intercepting a cluster munition turn that logic completely upside down.
Because if your air defense intercepts an incoming ballistic missile carrying a cluster payload midair, you inadvertently scatter those submunitions yourself.
You are essentially doing the attacker's job for them.
Exactly. You're spreading the damage over an even wider area.
And it creates a uniquely lethal aftermath because of the dud rate. Modern submunitions have a failure rate, right? They hit the ground and don't explode.
Yeah, that rate is anywhere from 5% to 20%.
That is incredibly high.
It is. So by shooting down the missile over a water plant, the defenders accidentally turn the entire facility, the local power grid, and all the surrounding access roads into a massive, highly unstable minefield.
That unexploded ordnance, or UXO, makes rapid recovery completely impossible.
You cannot send utility crews in bucket trucks to splice power lines or mechanics to fix intake pumps when the ground is littered with sensitive explosives.
You'd lose your entire repair crew.
Right. So repairs are halted for months until highly specialized explosive ordnance disposal teams can clear a 5 to 8 kilometer radius entirely by hand.
Just imagine being the defense commander in that moment. You have about 3 seconds to make a decision.
It's an agonizing choice.
If you do not shoot the missile down, you suffer immediate, massive damage to the plant. But because the warhead detonates exactly as intended, there are very few unexploded bombs.
Right. You can send repair crews in the next morning and rebuild relatively quickly.
But if you do shoot it down, you accidentally drop hundreds of landmines on your own repair crews, triggering a long-term, society-collapsing water crisis.
That is the ultimate catch-22. A government cannot simply stand by and let a ballistic missile strike a populated area containing a military base and a water plant.
They just can't.
Because of the fundamental moral duty to protect citizens from immediate death, a government must fire its interceptors.
There is no political or ethical alternative but to shoot it down.
Exactly. By fulfilling their duty to protect immediate lives, they play exactly into the attacker's hands.
It is a lose-lose scenario engineered entirely around the mechanics of the defender's own advanced technology.
It turns their strength into a fatal weakness.
Okay, let's unpack this and pivot to the countermeasures. Because we can't just end on doom and gloom. How does a nation actually fix these fatal flaws and fight back against an attack designed to use its own defenses against it?
Chapter 4 really gets into this. And the first and most radical shift proposed is massive decentralization.
Moving entirely away from these 5 giant, vulnerable mega plants.
Right. The proposed solution is to replace them with thousands of small container-sized desalination units scattered randomly all along the coastline.
Just shipping containers, essentially.
Physically, yes. But they wouldn't just be standalone containers pumping water. They would operate as a unified AI-networked grid.
Think of it like a digital nervous system for infrastructure.
Exactly. If a cluster attack takes out 50 of these containers in one specific sector, the artificial intelligence instantly detects the drop in local supply.
And it dynamically shifts the production load to other containers further down the coast.
The system self-heals in real time. There is no longer a single catastrophic point of failure that can cripple the nation.
And the analysis says if you combine that smart grid with a massive push to boost groundwater replenishment and wastewater reuse to over 90%, you build a highly resilient distributed water network.
It makes the target too diffuse to destroy in a single wave.
The analysis also introduces a fascinating technological countermeasure to the cluster munition problem itself.
The lasers.
Yes, lasers. Specifically, high-power laser defense systems like the Iron Beam. Lasers change the defensive math entirely compared to the traditional interceptor missiles we just discussed.
They really do. First, interceptor missiles cost millions of dollars each.
And an adversary can easily deplete your stockpile during a prolonged saturation attack. They just send cheap decoys.
But a laser has essentially an unlimited magazine depth, restricted only by its power supply.
But more importantly for this specific cluster scenario, a laser can target and vaporize the incoming missile before the submunitions even have a chance to deploy.
Right, catching it the booze phase or mid-course.
Or, in a scenario where the payload does scatter, the laser system can theoretically target and burn up the individual submunitions midair,
completely preventing them from hitting the ground and becoming unexploded ordnance.
It entirely negates the minefield paradox.
It's the perfect technical counter. But the authors also stress a remarkably obvious yet politically difficult solution.
Physical separation.
Yes. Nations must systematically uncouple their military bases and nuclear sites from their civilian water infrastructure.
The era of hiding one behind the other has to end.
It's just too dangerous now.
The analysis pairs this physical separation with a doctrine of preemptive strikes to neutralize missile launch sites before they can even fire,
along with a renewed diplomatic push for a globally enforceable ban on cluster munitions.
And, crucially, the establishment of dedicated rapid response information teams.
Because of the social media aspect.
Right. You have to fight the propaganda war the exact second an attack begins to stop the public panic before it solidifies into riots.
The narrative defense is just as important as the missile defense.
So, what does this all mean? Why should you, listening to this right now, care about a highly specific infrastructure scenario focused on the Middle East?
Because the analysis explicitly warns that this is not an isolated regional thought experiment.
This vulnerability is becoming a global blueprint for asymmetric warfare.
It really is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the authors provide 2 chilling examples of how this exact cluster saturation template could be deployed in other major geopolitical flashpoints.
And the first is Taiwan.
Taiwan is an interesting case because it's an island with incredibly steep mountainous terrain.
Meaning rainwater runs off into the ocean very quickly. So despite heavy rainfall, they face severe chronic water shortages.
To combat this, they are aggressively expanding their coastal desalination capacity.
And Taiwan's water crisis isn't just about drinking water for its citizens, it's about the entire global economy.
Because of the microchips.
Exactly. Taiwan produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors. And those fabrication plants require millions of gallons of ultra-pure water every single day to operate.
Which is exactly the kind of vulnerability an adversary looks for.
Much like the previous examples in Israel, many of Taiwan's critical water facilities are located dangerously close to major military installations.
Like the ones around the Taichung port area.
Right. A cluster saturation attack targeting those specific geographic bottlenecks would instantly halt the domestic drinking water supply.
And freeze the global technology supply chain simultaneously.
It is effectively a shock and awe tactic meant to bypass a prolonged military ground war entirely.
By causing immediate, overwhelming societal and economic collapse, an attacking force aims to force capitulation before allied forces like the U.S. military could even mobilize or intervene.
The second global example brings us to the Korean Peninsula.
And this one involves a slightly different tactical approach due to the geography.
The analysis outlines how North Korea could adapt this strategy to target the incredibly dense civilian infrastructure and U.S. military installations located around the Seoul metropolitan area.
Right, places like Camp Humphreys.
In the South Korea scenario, the analysis details a combined arms approach, layering cluster munitions with advanced electronic warfare.
Specifically, electromagnetic pulses, or EMPs.
That is a terrifying combination. An EMP is designed to instantly fry unshielded digital systems, right?
Right, wiping out the communication grids and the computerized control systems managing the power and water.
And that is where the trap closes. You use the EMP to completely blind and disable the digital infrastructure.
And simultaneously, you blanket the physical terrain around the critical transformers and water pumps with cluster munitions.
So the resulting unexploded bombs create a physical barrier.
It becomes completely impossible for engineering crews to physically reach the facilities to repair the digital damage caused by the EMP.
It engineers an accelerating, cascading collapse of the entire country's infrastructure. The physical attack defends the digital attack.
It's a domino effect engineered with brutal precision. First, the power grid falls, then the water pressure drops to zero.
And then the society fragments.
This really raises an important question, and I think it synthesizes the core lesson of this entire analysis perfectly.
What's the main takeaway for you?
It's that the very systems we construct to project ultimate strength and protect our most vital resources, our heavily fortified military bases, our nuclear defense shields, our incredibly advanced interceptor missiles, can ironically become the exact mechanisms that ensure those resources are destroyed.
In our attempt to build the ultimate centralized security apparatus, we have accidentally engineered the perfect vulnerability for our adversaries to exploit.
It fundamentally changes what the word infrastructure actually means in the 21st century.
It absolutely does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over.
Something to keep you awake tonight.
Hopefully not too late. But it builds directly on the countermeasures we unpacked today. The analysis suggests decentralizing the water supply into thousands of small AI-connected containers to completely avoid a physical single point of failure.
Right, the smart grid.
But think about the reality of that architecture for a second. If you put a nation's entire distributed water supply onto a single interconnected artificial intelligence network, does that digital network just become the new invisible mega target?
That's a great point.
Meaning the next major war won't be fought with cluster bombs dropping over a coastal power plant, but with malicious code injected silently over a server. Just something to think about the next time you pour yourself a glass of water. Until next time, stay curious, and thanks for listening.
This narrative is a character string generated by an AI large language model statistically arranging words, and its truthfulness has not been verified. Such outputs without basis are called hallucinations. While confabulation more accurately reflects reality than hallucination, we follow convention. Therefore, the content described has no relation whatsoever to any real persons, organizations, nations, or events.